Hi, welcome back to Reading Queen, my fellow bookworms, and today we're going to be reading The Hiddenseek, of course. Come out, wherever you are. The new book, chapter 4 through 6. So, let's get started in 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Holly opened the front door. She hesitated, standing at the threshold between her house and the front yard. Inside, she could still hear the faint sounds of her dad searching in the kitchen cabinets. Outside, waiting for her, was Oliver. He was at the curb in front of her house. Next to him in the street were two huge, shaggy, horned farm animals. Probably oxen, Holly guessed. They were hitched to a simple wagon that consisted of two giant spoked wheels and a wooden bed to sit on, or haul things, she supposed, like terrified children. Oliver leaned against the cart with his arms crossed. He saw Holly, gave her a sour frown, and nodded. Changed your mind, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Holly nodded back. Holly closed the door to her house and went down the walkway to Oliver and his oxen. The reason for the odor that hung about Oliver was suddenly obvious. The oxen smelled terrible. Oliver began gently patting the beasts, who didn't seem to acknowledge his presence in any way. You ready? He asked, motioning for her to climb aboard. Up close, the cart looked like it was practically falling apart. Holly bit her lip. It was time to pull herself together. It didn't matter how rough and strange Oliver looked, or that he rode around on an ox cart. Of all things, she had to set things right, and he was the only one who knew how to do that. No more panicking. She had to have a clear mind. She had to think. One question, said Holly. You said there was a way to change everything back. How? What do I have to do? Oliver peered down at her, his dark brown eyes looking as wild as his unkempt hair. You have to play, he said. Play? Holly asked. Play what? The game, Oliver answered. That's not terribly specific, Holly said, before she could stop herself. She sometimes had a terrible habit of just blurting out exactly what she was thinking. It was probably one of the reasons she had such trouble making friends. Oliver narrowed his eyes at her. None of the other children have spoken to me like that, he growled. Holly's eyes lit up. Other children? He's done this before. You probably scared them, Holly said again, not thinking. What I meant to say is, where are we going? You are already there, Oliver told her. Holly looked around. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary. It was just her neighborhood. Single-story ranch homes with tidy, well-manicured lawns and sidewalks lined with trees. You now belong to a place that is hidden, Oliver said. Someplace forgotten, for the forgotten. Someplace lost, for the lost, the Hiddenseek. The Hiddenseek, Holly repeated. But I can get back to the normal world, right? You told me that I could. Oliver hesitated. It didn't seem like he wanted to answer. Finally, though, he spoke. Yes, it is possible. Okay, how do I do that? There's only one way to answer all the questions you have. He motioned to the ox cart. There's only one path forward. Holly looked back at her house. The red brick, the big windows framed with black shutters, the lawn with its patches of clover. This was home. This was where she was safe. But inside were parents who couldn't see or hear her. And what about Hector? She guessed he would forget about her too. Would she ever see him again? Where was he? Was he still with those other kids? A feeling that had been growing in her gut finally took shape. It was Hector's fault she was in this mess, stuck in whatever the Hiddenseek was. She was put here, betrayed by her own brother, and now she was invisible. Now she was forgotten. Well, she thought, not for long. Oliver had said there was a way back. All she had to do was play some game. She could do that. Okay, she said, looking Oliver square in the eye. Let's go. He held out a hand to help her up, but Holly ignored it and leapt into the ox cart by herself. The loose wooden planks of the rickety cart trembled under her weight. Oliver grunted and let out a dirty nasal snort. The similarities between him and his oxen weren't limited to their smell. He didn't get in the cart though, as Holly expected. He didn't get in the cart though, as Holly expected. Instead, he started walking back to her house. "Hey," she called to him. "What are you doing?" "I require one last thing," he said as he opened her front door. "I need your brother." Yay. Surprise, surprise. He needs the brother now. It was so hot today. Well, maybe it wasn't that hot, but it was hot to me because, I'm used to, more cold. I live by the ocean, so, yeah, colder climates. Okay, Chapter 5. Hector hid. He was at home, in a room that shouldn't exist. The fact that there was an extra room in the house, one that had never been there before, shouldn't have alarmed Hector. It was impossible, wasn't it? But this new room was not the most impossible thing that had happened today, not by a long shot. It had been a very strange day. Hector thought back to when all the weirdness had begun and immediately felt a rush of shame. He had been so excited. He was finally going to show Holly. He was finally going to outsmart her. The prank had been his idea, and everyone else had been more than happy to play along. All they had to do was ask to play hide and seek. Afterward, his friends ran off to do something else, but Hector snuck back to the park. He wanted to see Holly. He wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she'd been tricked. He hid behind one of the benches, peering between the wooden slats. He watched Holly emerge from her hiding place. When he saw her, though, Hector's smile disintegrated. The elation he had been feeling immediately curdled into guilt and regret. Holly's face was red. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She'd been crying. "Oh man," he thought, "I think I messed up." He watched her standing there, looking sad and hurt and alone. He considered stepping out from behind the bench and going to her, but what would he say? That it was just a joke? Could he lie and say it was somebody else's idea? She'd see right through that. He didn't want to face her. Not yet. Hiding seemed like a good idea. He would continue to hide. That was when the man showed up. Hector immediately knew something was off about him. With his old dirty clothes and tangled mess of hair, he looked like he'd just rolled out of the gutter. When Holly ran away and the man started walking after her, Hector knew he had to follow. He was careful to stay a good distance behind, so he wouldn't be seen. He crept along, watching as the man tromped across their lawn and around to the front of their house. What was he going to do? Ring the doorbell? Kick the front door down? Hector had to know what this man was up to. He crawled into the bushes that ran alongside of the house. He would use them as a cover, peek around the corner, and get a look at their front porch. He poked his head out and found himself face to face with a strange man. "Hector Thorne," the man said. "Yeah!" Hector responded, completely startled. "You thought you were playing a harmless game. You were wrong." "I'm sorry," Hector yelped. He didn't really know why he was apologizing. What was he supposed to do now? Come on, think, he admonished himself. What would Holly do? She'd ask questions. "What are you doing here?" Hector demanded. There's a lot of planes and helicopters right now. Okay. "What are you doing here?" Hector demanded. "Who are you?" "The name's Oliver," the man answered. "And you've got two choices. Stay here and be forever invisible, forever forgotten, or come with me." "Sure," Hector said. "Oh," Oliver widened his eyes. "But you don't want to stay here?" "Oh," Oliver widened his eyes. "But you don't want to stay here. Here is..." He stopped, scratching his head vigorously like he had fleas. "Wait, did you say yes?" "Yeah," Hector smiled. "Sounds good." Hector had no intention of going anywhere with this guy, but he also knew arguing with adults was stupid. They never changed their minds about anything. Better to agree with them, wait until they got distracted, which never took long, and then go do whatever you were doing, wherever you were going. Then go do whatever you were going to do in the first place. Oliver bent over and grabbed Hector under his arms. The smell was unbearable. "This dude stinks," Hector thought, "like the stink of 1,000 butts stink." He had never wanted to hold his nose more in his entire life. Oliver carried Hector to the curb in front of their house. There were two big, ugly animals there, both of them yoked to an old wooden cart. Oliver put Hector down in the cart. "Wait here," he said. "I will be back with your sister." Then he went up the walkway to the house and stepped inside. Hector couldn't believe his luck. He hopped out of the cart. Now he could just run off and get as far away from that smelly weirdo as possible. But Holly's still in there. Oliver said he was going to get his sister. Hector couldn't just leave her, especially after what he'd done. Hector tiptoed inside, first checking out their kitchen. It was a mess, as usual these days. Stacks of dirty dishes were in the sink. Chip bags and cereal boxes cluttered the counters. The fridge, as always, was covered in little magnets holding up tests and essays, all with perfect scores, all of them Holly's. A shrine to her brilliance. Nothing of Hector's up there. Also, as usual, there was no sign of his sister or Oliver. "I should call 911, Hector thought. He checked the counter over the junk drawer, where Mom and Dad kept everything from pens and pencils to tape and batteries to rubber bands and other stuff that didn't belong anywhere else. There used to be a phone there, an old landline, but Dad had gotten rid of it. No, Hector suddenly remembered. He didn't get rid of the phone. He moved it to his office. Hector quietly made his way to the hall, but when he got near the office, he stopped. The door was open. It was never open. Then he heard voices. "Here's where you will be stuck, helpless, watching everyone go about their lives as if you never even existed." It was Oliver's voice coming from the office. "No, you do not want to stay here. You want to go back." Was Oliver talking to Dad? Why wasn't Dad talking back? Then Hector noticed the picture. It was their family picture, the only one on the wall. They had taken it a few years ago, one of those cheesy studio portraits. Hector remembered the whole ordeal perfectly. How Mom had made Holly wear a dress, which she hated. How he kept sliding off his stool trying to escape. How Mom and Dad tried to bribe them into compliance, all while maintaining perfect forced smiles. Every shot the photographer took was a disaster. Naturally became everyone's favorite. favorite Thorne family photo. Something that never failed to make them laugh. Except now the picture was different. There were 2 other kids in it. Everything else was as it should be. There was Hector, halfway off the stool, right next to Holly, looking all slouchy and miserable. Dad was there, a stressed-out smile plastered on his face, and there was Mom. But next to her were 2 boys. They were older kids, both of them almost as tall as Mom. The camera had caught them fighting, trying to elbow each other. Back? Back where? Hector jumped. That's Holly, he realized. He snuck to the open doorway, poking his head just around the edge to get a look. Big, hairy Oliver was looming over Holly. He was holding his hand out to her. Holly shied away like his hand was a disease and contagious. Dad was at his desk, clacking away at his keyboard as if nothing at all were amiss. Have it your way, Oliver said. Then he sighed and stood up straight. He took a step back. Hector froze as he realized what was happening. He's coming, his mind screamed, trying to jolt his petrified body into action. Hide! Hector's legs finally got the message, and he rushed down the hall, scrambling to his room. He swung the door open, and at the last second remembered to shut it gently, quietly, behind him. Then he gasped. This room had a bunk bed. The walls were lined with bookshelves, all of which were overflowing with books. There were 0 toys. This isn't my room, he realized. It wasn't any room he had ever seen in his life. What in the world is this? The sound of footsteps in the hallway spurred him into action. He had to hide. There wasn't time to get creative. He dropped to his stomach and squirmed under the bed. It was a tight squeeze, but there was just enough room for him. He waited. He strained to hear if anything was happening in the house. He heard some bumps, maybe a cabinet opening. He thought he heard voices. He couldn't be sure. Long minutes went by. He wanted to get out, to run, but he didn't dare move. At last, he heard footsteps again in the hallway. They got louder and louder. Something was coming, getting close. From under the bed, Hector could see the door open and a pair of filthy, tattered boots stomped into the room. There was no question who they belonged to. Come out, Hector Thorne, Oliver said. Your sister is waiting. So now it's switching off between Hector and Holly. Yeah. One more chapter. Notice how they're getting slightly longer as we go. It usually depends which chapter it is, but most of the time they're going to get a little longer each time. This one's a pretty short chapter though, so let's get into it. Chapter 6. Holly sat in the ox cart. She watched the front door, waiting for Oliver to come back out, but dreading his return. Was Hector really inside this whole time? She wondered. Part of her wanted to see him. Part of her hoped he was somewhere else, somewhere safe. And then there was another part of her that was still angry. They're probably still laughing at you if they remember you at all. The front door opened. Out walked Oliver. Next to him, looking scared and confused, was Hector. He saw her and ran to the ox cart. Holly, he said, stopping just short, putting his hands on the edge. Hector, she sighed. The anger she'd been feeling went away. What she felt now more than anything was relief. He knew who she was. He could see her. She hadn't been completely forgotten by everyone she knew. Hey, dummy, she said, using her pet name for him. Holly, what's happening? Hector asked. I saw Dad. Why didn't he say anything? I don't know, she said. It was the same with me. Then that man said we have to go with him. He craned his neck around, checking both ways down the street as if looking for help. Before she could answer, Oliver came up behind Hector, lifted him by the armpits, and set him down next to Holly. Then he pulled him pulled himself onto the cart, stepping up with quick motion. He nudged Hector and Holly aside with his hip. "Time to go," Oliver said. Hector's face was crumpled. He looked ready to cry. "We're going to be okay," she told him. He wouldn't look at her. Tears began to slip from his eyes. He was melting down. He was melting down. She had to help him keep it together, or they'd never make it out of this. She put her hands on his shoulders, bringing her face close to his. "Come on," she whispered to him. "We can do this." Sorry. He nodded. "Yeah." He wiped his nose with his sleeve. Oliver leaned over and gave one of the oxen a pat on the back. The animal grunted, and the pair started pulling the wobbly, creaking wagon slowly forward. "Where are we going?" Holly asked. "I thought you said that we are already here." "Yes," Oliver said curtly. She could see that he was getting annoyed, but she kept talking anyway. "So, where are you taking us?" "Crossroads," Oliver said, and pointed to the four-way stop at the corner. Holly looked. Everything still seemed normally. There was just the road, the green street signs with familiar names, and a red stop sign. The ox cart continued to scrape slowly along, over a speed bump. It would have been easier to walk, Holly thought. "So, no cars where you're from, or like bicycles?" she asked. She really couldn't help herself. "Try not to speak," Oliver said. He didn't look at them, instead keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "You should be preparing." Holly didn't like the sound of that. Preparing? How? For what? Oliver did turn to them. He looked stern. Some children panic when they see certain things. They can't handle it. He gave Holly and Hector a knowing look and tapped his head with his finger. "That's why I said prepare." Holly felt her stomach drop. Maybe they should have stayed home after all. She turned around toward their house. They hadn't gone that far. She could still jump out and run back. Best to hold on. They reached the crossroads, and the wind shifted. It was sharp and fierce, whipping across Holly's face. She was surprised to find the air pummeling her cheeks. Pummeling her cheeks was crisp and cool. Only seconds ago, the weather had been warm. Hector's wavy hair flapped in the wind. Next came the fog. It drifted down and settled over the houses and trees, its misty tendrils shrouding the whole neighborhood in gray. The road ahead was now impossible to see, obscured in a cloud. The hair on Holly's arms stood up, and not just from the cold. "What's happening?" Hector asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The ox cart jolted, like they had hit a pothole. Oliver wasn't answering. He kept his eyes forward, a grim resolve on his face. She noticed he was gripping the edge of the wagon. His knuckles were white. Another bump, and the ox cart began to roll and bounce faster. Holly felt herself leaning forward. They were going downhill, but that didn't make sense. There were no hills in her neighborhood. They went faster still. The two oxen shambled forward, their stout hooves struggling to keep pace with their own momentum. One of them grunted. Scenery raced by through the mist. Holly saw fewer and fewer houses and more trees. Different trees, not the familiar oaks and maples she knew so well, but towering trees with outstretched limbs that brushed the sky. The ground was no longer asphalt but dirt. The road ahead was still a mass of fog, and they were rushing right into it. Her entire body rumbled and shook along with the ox cart as they careened toward into the unknown wilderness. Hector squeezed her hand so hard that it hurt, but she didn't let go, holding on to him just as fiercely. With her other hand, she gripped her seat tighter, her stomach lurching as they bowled downhill like rocks in a landslide. Then they stopped. We've reached page 30, and we just passed it right now, so technically now we're at page 31. But anyways, thank you so much for watching the Hiddenseek chapters 4 through 6. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications, maybe, and share your friends for more awesome videos like this. Bye! That.